In this case, we're going to be mapping the features within the refugee settlement. So we're going to identify different features within Pajarinia, which we'll use to create a satellite image-based settlement boundary map in Section 3. These are the results that you should be obtaining in Section 2. We're going to visualize building footprints with a confidence score. We're going to examine features of interest identified in Section 1. We're going to create a spectral signature plots for the post-establishment period, and that's going to help delineate the refugee settlement boundary among different land cover types. So you're going to get the settlement, the road, the forest, you're seeing here. We're going to plot those spectral values by class type, and this is something you do in remote sensing, the spectral indices, because it's going to give you information from the land that you're working with. And we're going to plot the values for NDVI, NDVI, and NBR that we calculated in Section 1, as we just saw. So that is basically how this chapter is going, is that everything that you do in the previous sections are going to be useful in the next sections. In Section 1, we use the Landsat data to gauge changes in land cover conditions and types, but you can also use other data products that are derived from satellite imagery. Like I mentioned, in Section 2, we're going to be looking at building footprints, and those will usually represent geometries of individual structures and dwellings, and those are often used to estimate human populations and population density in humanitarian context. And then once you know that information, you can then support the planning and delivery of food and other kinds of aids, because you have a lot more information about the land cover, but you also have more information about population. So in this section, we're going to identify different features within Pajarinia. And then with that, we're going to use that to create a satellite image-based settlement boundary map in Section 3, like I mentioned here. Let's add our script. We're going to be working with A17B, and we're going to add it to our new script. So I'm just going to close these up for now. So below checkpoint, we've got our Section 2. And then we're going to minimize this. So first, what we're doing is that we're going to load the open buildings V1 polygons dataset, which is this here, and that you can find in the Earth Data Catalog, which you've done in many chapters beforehand. This dataset includes the satellite-derived building footprints based on very high resolution, which is 0.5 meter satellite imagery, and each footprint has a confidence score. So let's get started. Okay, so first off, we're going to start with visualizing open buildings datasets. We're going to use this because, as I mentioned for Section 2, building footprints are going to be used as a way to do some population estimates. So first off, we're going to open our buildings dataset because that's going to be useful for the rest of the section. And so the first thing you're going to see here is that we're using a Google Research Open Buildings polygon dataset. So this data set, if you put it in the Google catalog, you won't have any results. And if you copy paste from the checkpoint like we did, then you're going to come across this. And it's just to say that if you use the catalog, you're most likely to get a result if you reduce. And the most important part is just looking at a data set that's going to have the resolution that you need. In this case, we're looking for a 0.5 meter resolution. That one has it, so it would be useful. If you look at this, this is a table in this case, and the resolution is 50 centimeters. So this is in the case of a different scenario where you wouldn't be copy pasting this code. But otherwise, without looking in the data catalog, the data set that we have and that we're assigning to the footprints variable will work if you run the code in your own script. So we're going to visualize building footprints with a confidence score above 75% in orange, which we'll set right after here. And that's going to be our high confidence. And then our low confidence in purple is going to be building footprints with a 75% or lower confidence. So this is what it's saying right here. And now we're adding to layers. So that's our first set. Now, with those maps of building footprints in place, or this map, in fact, because we have the high and the low, we're going to look at features of interest that we identified in Section 1. So when we're looking at NDVI, for example, examining some land cover changes pre-establishment and post-establishment, we're going to look at the different, instead of looking at the different indices, we're going to examine the change in land cover. So the first thing you're going to do is load those land cover samples. Now, in this case, we're loading a feature collection of sample locations of infrastructure, forest, agriculture that's visible on the satellite-based map, as well as a sample of building footprint locations, and that's in here. And this is going to be our LC points. But this, again, this is not code that I created. The creator took it from their own assets, and this is where it's being loaded from. So that's why it's important that if you're going to work with your own script to just copy paste from the checkpoint, because this is coming from the creator's assets. Once we have those loaded, we're going to create a function to set feature properties based on values. So each property is going to have a value. If you've done previous chapters, you're aware of how classifications occur. So we've got our features with colors, and then we're going to map this out with the displayed colors. We're going to apply the function to our LC points, our style, and then we're going to set our layer title so that we can add it to the map. And when we print it, each feature that's outputted has a value, and that value is the feature type. So by writing this function to use this value property, we can then automatically assign a unique color to each feature and then classify it for later. And this is something that you should have seen in other chapters and should be pretty known to you so far. Let's print this out. This is going to give us the feature samples across Pagarinia refugee settlement. And this is the end result that we're looking for, but so we don't have our blue boundary on yet. We're going to do that later. But if you look at what's happening here, remember we have our building footprints. The high confidence is 75%, over 75%, and that's in orange. And then you've got a lower confidence of building footprints that's scored in purple. So I'm going to remove these layers. And I can keep the Pagarinia refugee. This is from the UNHCR. That's where this boundary is from. But you have your building's high confidence. You've got your low confidence, and then these are our land cover samples. So we've assigned colors to every feature. And so every feature type is going to have its own color, and that's going to help us identify what's in the area. So from this map, we have features that we want to use, but we want to use the sample land cover locations to help delineate the refugee settlement boundary. So to do that, we need the different land cover types to be spectrally distinguishable from each other. And then to do that, to see how the spectral values vary among different features, like agriculture versus forest or urban, and the type of things that you've seen in the classification chapters, we're going to create spectral signature plots for the post-establishment period, so after 2016. So the first thing you'll do after applying the function, we're going to use reduce to image to convert our LC points feature collection to an image. And then you've got LC ban as our variable, and then you add that image to the post-establishment composite. So this is what's happening here. And so we're adding the land cover class to the post-establishment composites that we made in section 1, if you recall, the post-median. And that's so the class and spectral value information can be referenced together in our spectral signature plots. So that's why it's so important to understand each section of this chapter, because they're all connected. What we do in section 1 is valuable for section 2, and so on. Once that has been added to the composite, you'll define bands that will be visualized in the chart. So that's just, again, naming it so it's easier to read, as we had done a while back. And then you print your post median, because now the post median is more than what we had done in section 1. Now it has the LC band, which is basically your land cover sample feature collection that was reduced to an image. So the next step is that once we have this post median image, how we can sample at specific sample locations and identify not only the spectral values, but also the class type. Now we can plot the spectral values by class type. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the blue, green, red here. And if you notice, as we're naming the bands for the chart, because band names are sorted alphabetically on the x-axis, the NIR values are plotted in between green and red and are therefore out of order with respect to band wavelengths, if you recall what we did in section 1. So here we'll be plotting the median band value for each land cover type as a scatter chart, as I just showed. And the colors go with what we used earlier for the function, where we set our feature properties based on value and made a land cover sample map. So the colors are going to be the same as what we just set here. when you do your colors. The class labels, you've got settlement, road, forest, agriculture. You've got scatter chart and post. You're printing it as post bands chart because we're doing the post medium. So once you've got your chart labels already, we're going to define the spectral indices that'll be visualized in the chart. And these are the ones that we had created in section 1. And because these bands range from -1 to 1, we have to plot their values separately from the Landsat band spectral signature plots, because here we're using scaled reflectance values, which are usually used to calculate spectral indices. So here we define the spectral indices that we will be visualizing in the chart. And then we're creating this second plot for the median index value for each line cover type. And now we're working with LC points, just to mention for region. And again, we're using the same color palette for our line as for our line cover samples right here. And it's in this case, it's our post indices chart. And again, we have the same class labels and the post median selecting index bands. And now we have just a different name. But this is just because in the v-axis, for example, we have value. And in here, because we're plotting the values for the indices that we found in section 1, in this case, it's going to be reflectance for the median band value for each line cover type. So we've got reflectance, sorry, scaled reflectance values here, and those usually are used to calculate spectral indices. Then before we do that, we're just going to add in the code again for painting our boundary over. We technically, if you've run section 1, then you're going to have that value and that boundary already there. But again, you just use the same code as section 1, and then you got your Peggy refugee settlement boundary. So just to re-summarize kind of what's happening in the last section here, once you've had your function, your post medium, because you've attached your LC points, you've created your LC band, and you've attached that band to the post medium, then you're basically plotting 2 scatter charts. And this is for us to see how the spectral values will vary among different features so that we can identify them and differentiate them. And we can create spectral signature plots for the post-establishment period so that we can analyze them after 2016. That should give us 2 charts. So let's run it and then we can look at them. So this is the first plot that we looked at. These are going to be our spectral values. And so in this case, it's the median band value for each land cover type. And the colors again represent each feature type. And some questions that you can look at the book is, are the spectral profiles of the 4 feature types distinct from each other? Which profiles are the most similar overall? So in this case, you've got forest, agriculture, road settlement. You can see road settlement kind of follow each other quite closely in forest and agriculture as well. And this is based on what they're based on the band specifically and the reflectance value, and that will determine, and that is usually determined by doing a bit of research on how they show up usually in terms of reflectance and spectral signatures. When you're trying to identify different feature types, in remote sensing, for example, the spectral signatures are what really help differentiate, but there's a lot of times that it can be quite the same. And so it's important to understand where you're supposed to be looking to identify and what you're supposed to be looking for and whether or not it's picking up the right things. And so in this case here, these are our median index values because we calculated NDVI, NDBI, and NBR in section 1. And these bands range from -1 to 1, and that's why we plotted their values separately, because if you look here, we're looking at reflectance, and here we're looking at a totally different number. So in here, this graph is showing you the median index value for each land cover type, again, based on our colors. You've got NBR, NDBI, and NDVI. NVI usually is going to be related to vegetation. So it really helps to know what all of these represent. NDVI, for example, is going to help determine or detect built-up manufactured areas. And then NDVI, for example, is going to be more vegetation. And then the normalized burned ratio is going to give you an idea of what's been there and well, I mean, if there's been any fires or destruction of the vegetation. And it's kind of barren land. So in the questions for the book, for example, it tells you to play around with it based on what we have here. And you can see there's some things outside. So that's we're going to go in section 3 and section 4 because we can kind of create our own boundary. But if we take these out, for example, and we look at the median, um, this is our false color composite. How a question in the book is how would you describe the coverage of the footprints within the settlement? Are there sections of the settlement visible in the base map or the post-establishment composite that are missing footprints? So the base map, for example, based on what shows up and what you see, it's going to determine, again, what I mentioned is, what shows up. Is it showing it properly? Do we have somewhat of a high efficiency in what it's capturing, especially for our feature types? Question yourself as to why these might look similar or where they differ, why they differ. And that just goes with when you're looking at remote sensing images. That is section 2. Now we're going to move on to section 3. We're slowly building our sections. So this is really just to get you thinking about the landscape and thinking about what you see, researching things you might not know, researching things about spectral indices, spectral signatures, their differences, what they tell you about a landscape, what our colors are assigned. In this case, we've got settlement in orange, sorry, settlement in blue, road in purple, forest agriculture, orange and red. So you can see the NDVI, for example, is going to be a lot higher for forest and agriculture than it is for settlement and road. NDVI is going to be lower for forest and agriculture than it is for settlement and road. And this is just because they tell you different things about the pixel values that you're extrapolating. Okay, so there's a few questions in the book that are there for you to try out pretty much after each section. So I invite you to, after going through this, trying out some of the questions, and then we're going to go to section 3.